Greetings and salutations, and thank you for clicking on this video. It is time for our question and answer series. This will be episode 8 of the Q&A series, and this time around I'm going to do something a little different. Usually what I do is pick some comments that come to me through email or YouTube, and I respond to them in a video, and this time around I'm going to take some time out to talk a bit about myself. There are 15,000 subscribers to this channel, which to me is an amazing number. And for those of you who are new to the channel and haven't been following the videos for a while, I thought maybe it might be fun to kind of sit back and talk about my experiences with computers and what qualifies me to have an opinion and why I'm doing this in the first place. Before we get into all of that, just a quick follow-up on a couple of things. First of all, the last video I posted with the clickbait title, what's the best Linux distro? They all suck. First of all, the title and the opening remark in that video were tongue-in-cheek, and I wasn't trying to make anybody mad. I don't think Linux sucks. What I was saying is that it depends on who you are. Every Linux distro has people who love it, and everyone has people who hate it. So they all suck. It depends on what your opinion is on that distro and what your use case is and why you're using it in the first place. So anyway, that's what that was all about. And I cannot believe the number of comments that I've gotten on that video. People really reacted to it. And most folks got it. It's been a kind of a fun little debate going back and forth. People have nice things to say. But there were a few that got highly offended. I'm sorry about that. It wasn't intended to be an offensive video or start a flame war. It was just, goofing around here, man. And if I just put, like somebody suggested, why did you put such a shocking title? Why didn't you call it something like Problems with Current Linux Distros? And I was like, do you think anybody's actually going to watch that? So anyway. Also, for those of you who watched that video, this machine is now back on Linux Mint. Ubuntu 16.04.1 did not work out very well, kept locking up. And I think what's going on here is that it's not necessarily the distros themselves that are giving me a problem, but I think there's might be an issue with the GPU in this machine becoming unstable. This machine is a few years old, and it just doesn't seem to work very well with the 4.4 kernel. So that's one of the reasons I'm running Linux Mint, because I have this on 4.2, and with that, it's not super stable, but it runs long enough for me to get things done. It will occasionally, I'll get a little glitch, but not like I get with anything based on 1604. It's like, it just doesn't like it. So the search starts for a new machine to replace this one somewhere down the road, but we're good for now as long as Linux Mint holds it together. So anyway, got a bunch of comments on that video, and I do thank you for that. And also, I wanted to say before I jumped into the biography section of the video that those of you who are new to this channel, I'm getting a lot of questions lately, but I'm getting a lot of repeat questions, and that's just because new people are coming along, they haven't seen the videos, that sort of thing. I think I mentioned this a few videos back, but I'm going to mention it again. There are a ton of videos on this channel. Over the last couple of years, I think I have posted a video about pretty much every aspect of running Linux on a desktop at home or in a small business, and all the little tricks and things that you might need to do. I mean, I haven't covered everything, of course, but a lot of it is here. So what I suggest that you do, if you're interested, is come to the channel page here, and I've got them divided up into playlists. There are Linux tips and Linux talks. And what you can do is just launch these playlists, and I don't expect you to watch every video from beginning to end to end. The idea is that you can put it in the playlist player, and then you can scroll up and down the list of videos that come up on the right-hand side of the screen and pick one about whatever you want to learn about. Or, of course, you can always do a search here on the page and just put something in. So I get a lot of questions about Samba. I have a video up about configuring Samba. So do a search for Samba with my name in Google. It'll come right up. It'll go straight to that video. Or you can come to the page here and you can watch the video there. So just to let you know, I end up sharing these videos a lot with people. I go back and I go, well, I have a video about that, so they'll ask a question and I'll just send them a link to the video. So that might help you out if you want to see what I've talked about and all that stuff. It's all here. There's more than 100 videos about Linux, and so you can check them out. Okay, so let us jump over a screen, and I want to talk a little bit about my experience with computers and where I come from. And I've mentioned this in other videos. I know I talked a little bit about this when I just did the podcast with Jeremy O'Connell from CyberWeb Solutions. And yes, we will be doing another one of those. I'm going to be probably recording it next week, and we're going to do one that's going to be all about the cloud. What does that mean when we talk about cloud computing? And it should be a lot of fun. I've got a couple of people who are coming on. Well, Jeremy's going to be here, but I have a person coming on whose job is to design systems for companies to put things in the cloud, and he's got some really interesting things to say, so that's coming up. Well, I am a child of the 70s, and I went to high school in the roaring 80s. Those halcyon days, how wonderful they were. And my first computer that I ever had anything to do with was a Commodore 64. And I got that computer, well, I had it in the summer of 1984. I can tell you why, because I sat in my room for most of that summer typing on this machine. And what I was doing was, back in those days, you used to get computer programs in books. You'd get basic programs, and you would actually have to sit there and look at the book and copy the code in, and then you would see if you could get the thing to run. So that was my first experience with computers. And then I was just tickled pink. I got a data set, which was a cassette drive, and I could actually save the programs to tape. And so that was my entire summer of 1984. And to tell you the truth, I found it to be a little bit frustrating because it was a lot of work for not a lot of return at that time. Of course, a little bit later on, I got hip to the fact that one could go out and buy a game. And I had a friend of mine who had a Commodore system, and they had disk drives. So, their dad wasn't cheap and actually sprung for disk drives. So I would take my data set over there and copy their games onto my cassette. So it got a little bit more interesting. And then somewhere in late 1984, I'm a little foggy on this, but I think that was about the time that happened. My brother got a quote-unquote real computer. This was not my computer, it was his computer, but I got to learn a lot about using it. And he got a Tandy 1000, which was a computer that was made by Radio Shack. In the United States, they were known as Radio Shack. In the UK, they were the Tandy stores. Anyway, they built their own computer, and the Tandy 1000 was an IBM PC clone, and it ran DOS 3.1. And this was a real computer. Now we had a printer, and we had a floppy drive, and I remember that at one point it got upgraded, and we put a 20 megabyte hard drive in it. You heard me right, 20 megabytes. And I remember my brother going, man, we'll never fill this up. So we thought we were pretty hot with our Tandy 1000 back in 1985. And I really have to admit that I wasn't geeked out by computers at that period of time. What I really wanted to do was I wanted to work in radio. I wanted to be an engineer. I wanted to be a broadcast engineer. That's really what I wanted to do. And in 1986, I started taking engineering classes, and I was very lucky to go to a school. The city of Chesapeake, Virginia has a radio station. They own it. And it is owned by the city, and it's run by the Chesapeake Public Schools. It's still on the air. It's still there. And this radio station is not some little low-power 10-watt school station. It is a full power FM, and at that time the program was just excellent. And so I went to regular high school in the morning for half the time, and then I went to this special vocational class in the afternoon, which actually counted as college. I got 15 college credits out of that, and I took that class for 3 years. And we didn't have computers and radio stations in the 1980s. They just weren't there. And so I really wasn't getting into learning more about computers because I wasn't using them every day. I was using the Tandy 1000 to write papers and reports and print them out. But as far as like getting into how they work and that sort of thing, I wasn't really that interested. And then I got out of school, and the first radio station that I went to work for was WTAR in Norfolk, Virginia, which was a big CBS affiliate. That's the oldest radio station in Virginia. And they had a system there. They had computer terminals all over the building. They had dumb terminals. So the way it worked was there was a room that had a computer in it, which was a mini computer, and it ran Unix. And then in the studios and at certain people's desks and throughout the building, you would find these dumb terminals, and they would give you an account in the computer. That was one of the things I remember was getting my account. You gave them a password, and then you got to have access to the system. So this was my first exposure to a Unix-like operating system. I ended up working at that radio station for about 4 years, and so, but I never really got into how the computer worked. I never cared. The only thing I ever used it for was to get news stories, because that's what that machine did for the people in the programming department. Was you could log in, and then you could go to the AP wire service, UPI wire service. CBS had a feed out of New York. We were a CBS affiliate, so we got that, and you could pull up these stories and then you could print them. It also had some sort of word processing program in it. I don't remember what it was. This was all terminal based. It was all green screen. It was not graphical, and that allowed you to write your own stories. So I got kind of familiar with using that program, and then learning how to pipe things through spell if it was something that somebody else actually was going to see. And so I did that for about 4 years. But I didn't really ever go back and mess with the computer. I just used it. Thought it was pretty cool to have that in there. It was kind of nice because, like I said, it was on a computer screen, and you could go in, and I don't remember all the commands, of course, but there were programs on there that brought in all of those news wires and news feeds and things like that. So they'd all show up on the terminal. And then the next job not the next job, but one of the next jobs I got after I left that job was in this little bitty town in Western Virginia. And I walked into the place, and they had the first computer-based radio automation system that I ever saw. And it was a system called Systemation. I remember the name of it, and it ran on DOS. It was DOS, at that point in time, it was like DOS 5. And the guy, when I had the interview with the general manager, he said, "You're going to have to learn how to use this thing." And I said, well, of course, I bluffed it and said, well, I'm kind of used to using computers. And the truth of the matter was I didn't know anything about how these systems worked, especially those automation systems. But what I did is they had a book there. They had the books. They had the manual for the automation system. And they also had the manual for DOS with all the commands in it. So I took the book home so I could read up on it. And I actually started to get really interested in it. And that was also right around the time that Windows first came along. I had seen Apple IIs and Macs in school, but like I said, I never got really too interested in it. And I remember the first time sitting down playing with Microsoft Windows, which was version 3.1, and being kind of fascinated with it. It just started to click. Now, I'm doing all the radio stuff in the background here. I never did become a full-fledged engineer. I was always an engineer's helper, and I did take contract jobs where I did some engineering work, but by the time that I had graduated school, I had pretty much caught the bug that I wanted to be on the air. So at this radio station, I was on the air. And during that period of time, we're talking about the mid-90s, was when digital recording started to come into radio, hard drive-based systems. Like up to that point, we used tape to record everything, and if you wanted to edit something, you did it with a razor blade. And this was right when the digital audio workstations were starting to show up, and it was also the time when the automation systems were coming along. So that was a real learning experience as I was going along. I was learning more about computers, learning more about how they worked and all that kind of stuff. So I got to be really good at working with automation systems. Now, this is what a typical automation system looks like in a modern radio station. The program that you are looking at is called iMediaTouch, and this was the last automation system, one of the last automation systems that I worked with. And I actually contributed a lot of code to this system, but I'm getting kind of ahead of myself. So anyway, we had Systemation, and then we went on to something called Scott Studios, which was a much more advanced system. We got that in 1996, and the thing I remember about it is that the computers themselves to run this thing, the workstations, cost $40,000, and they were on a coaxial token ring network, and they ran on DOS. And one of the big deals about it is that it had a 9 gigabyte hard drive in it, which was, for 1996, that was huge. If you can imagine a hard drive that was the size of 2 DVD drives stacked up on top of each other, so 2 5 1/4 bays for this 9 gigabyte drive. And it was mounted in a rack, and the rack was under a counter, and if that drive was working and you had your elbows on the counter, you could actually feel it working. It felt like it was churning butter. That was how big it was. So anyway, I worked with Scott Studios, and we were not one of the first stations that had it, but we were early adopters for that, which is a really cool system. And I ended up working with Scott at a couple of other places. I got a job in 1997 with Chesapeake Public Schools. I had come back to the Hampton Roads area by then, and I was actually training students there on how to use the Scott Studio system. And so I used that in most of the radio stations that I worked in for the next few years. And then the next system that I ended up working with was this one right here, which was MediaTouch. So this would have been 2005 that I started working with this one. But yeah, I'm still getting way ahead of myself because I'm forgetting to tell you all a very important point. And that is, I quit radio for a while, and that was in 1999, very early 99. This was a little detour I took. I got kind of tired. I didn't like where I was working. Thought it was getting to be a dead end. And I took a job with, ta-da, Gateway Computer. They had a plant at that time in Hampton, Virginia. And I lived in Hampton, so it was right down the road from me. And I went to work for them. My title there was Accelerated Technical Support Person. I guess that's the best way to put it. The factory at Gateway at that time, on the bottom floor was the factory itself. They actually built computers there. And then the whole second floor was devoted to the call center and a computer lab. So the call center, of course, was where people would call in and go, hey, this thing's broken. I don't know what to do. And you'd try and help them. And then in the back of the call center, they had a computer lab. And I worked with the accelerated team that if the average person on the floor couldn't fix it, they would send it to us. And I didn't work there for very long because I didn't like the way Gateway did things. They just did some really goofy stuff. They kind of shot themselves in the foot. What they would do is, okay, they would design a computer and they would have this hard drive in it, and they would have this kind of memory and this kind of motherboard and that kind of stuff in it. And then as the computers were rolling along, if they found a cheaper hard drive or something like that, they would swap that out, and it would end up causing issues because you got to remember this is the late 90s. This is when plug and play first came along, and sometimes that hardware did not talk well to each other in those machines, even though they had tested it in the lab. If they changed something somewhere along the way, anyway, it was just a nightmare trying to keep up with those changes. And that's the reason why Gateway computers had the reputation of, A, they either worked like tanks and went on forever, they were tough, or you'd buy a gateway and it was a piece of junk. And the reason why was because it depended on the production line changes. But the best thing that came out of working at Gateway was the training, because they had this ongoing training. We went through so much training. They had guys there that had come from the military, and they really knew how to teach class, and they knew how to teach you how a computer worked, and we had to learn everything about them. And one of the exams that we had was, I remember, was we had 2 hours. We had to take a computer, take it completely apart down to component level. You couldn't have any sub-assemblies. That meant you had to take the processor off the board, you had to take all the hard drives out of the hard drive cage, and then you had to put it all back together, back in the case, and you had to be able to boot it up. And then the next thing that you had to do was you had to completely reinstall the operating system, and you had to upgrade it through, you had to start with DOS, then upgrade to Windows 3.11, then upgrade to Windows 95, and then to 98. You had 2 hours to do that. I actually did it. I have no idea how I did it. But the training was the best part of it. So when I was there, I got a TSP, which is a Microsoft Technical Support Professional, and the other one was the MCSE, which is Microsoft Certified Support something or other. I don't know what that is. It's been a long time. I don't even have those certificates anymore. I lost them in a move because that was 1999. But anyway, that's where that started. And I didn't work for Gateway long. I ended up getting a job offer to go back to radio, so I did. And the strange thing that happened was that they saw this on my resume, and now the automation systems were really coming into radio stations. It was all going digital. And so they saw that on my resume, and they went, "Oh, you have some real computer experience." And I said, "Yeah." And so what I ended up doing was getting these jobs where I was, like, my titles were program director or operations manager, and then on the side I was always maintaining all the computer networks. And the systems were starting to get complicated. So we can jump back to this picture of the Media Touch screen. These systems, they were pretty awesome. You could do a lot with them, and the way you programmed these systems was you would have a list of commands that these things did. They basically did things one at a time. These machines did not think for themselves in any way. So what you had to do was supply the system with a list of instructions for the day. And that was my job, was to make sure that that system had the right instructions for what songs, what commercials, what switches to throw, and when to do it, and all that other stuff. And there's a lot of software that goes into that. You don't do it manually. You have a support software. The ones that I used was RCS Selector, which was for scheduling music. That kept up with the music library. It also kept up with doing things like generating playlist reports for BMI and ASCAP, which are companies that figure out all the copyright things for radio stations, and you have to pay them royalties to use the music. So that software would generate that. That was something that I had to keep up with. Also, in radio, the department that schedules the commercials, radio and television, that's called the traffic department. I know, you'd think traffic report, but that's what it's called. And so that department had a system that generated a log that would have all the commercials for the day. And what I would do is generate the music log, generate the traffic log for the day, and then merge them all together, and then edit those logs command by command by command, and make sure they worked okay. And one of the things that was interesting about Media Touch was the manual was horrible. Probably a lot better now. This has been a long time ago. I first started using Media Touch in 2005, and I started playing with it. I wanted to see if I could get the thing to do things. They'd have, like, if you wanted the system to do something like, okay, what I want you to do is, I don't care what you're doing, I want you to fade out, and I want you to switch to this satellite feed at the top of the hour. In the manual, they had 3 commands to make this happen. You had to do 3 things in a row, and I went, why do you have to do that? So I started poking at it, and I actually got to a place where I was sending the programmers for Media Touch commands. I was sending them emails and going, hey, this works, this works, this works. So the next job that I had, actually worked with Google directly. At that point in time, and now we're talking about 2006, 2007, they owned a couple of these automation systems. They had bought Scott Studios, they had bought one called Maestro, and they Maestro system, I was working with the programmers at that time doing beta testing for them. So I started to learn a little bit more about the internal things about how these systems worked. And also by that time, I was the only person maintaining all the servers on the network and everything. So I learned a lot about peer-to-peer networking, and this was Windows 2000 and XP, and keeping those machines running and keeping them safe and secure. And so that's where I was at when my radio career went poof. What happened was that in the United States, of course, everybody knows that in 2008 there was the bank crash, which happened in fall of 2008. What you don't know about was that in the fall of 2007 there was a crash like that in the media companies. And the radio station that I was working at the time, they had a management restructuring, and so they fired me. And I spent about a year looking for a job, and I never did find one. So started an insurance agency, and I did that for a little while, and I did a bunch of things, and life got crazy for a while, and so I was doing freelance voiceover work. I was doing freelance audio production, all that kind of stuff. And so that gave me a little bit more time, and I started playing around with this thing called Linux. Now, the first time that I ever saw Linux was in 1999, and it was at Gateway Computer, and it was in the computer lab. They had one machine that was running Linux. They were, I guess that the people there were looking at Linux and wondering whether they might want to actually offer it to people. And the Linux that I saw was Caldera Open Linux, and this is what it looked like. And it had a very early KDE desktop. I remember that, and it sort of kind of looked like this. And so I didn't really get to play with it much. I just looked at it. But something about it fascinated me. And this was back in 1999, remember. And I never really got in. I didn't start messing with it at home at that time. I didn't have the hardware, and I didn't have the time. I was working too hard. I remember you used to be able at that time to go to a bookstore, and they would sell Linux in a box, and it would come on DVDs, or rather CDs, and then you could install it on your computer. And I just didn't have the time to mess with it. I do remember standing at a bookstore and looking at, they had a couple of Linux distributions there. One of them was Caldera, and the other one was Red Hat. Or I'm pretty sure it was Red Hat. I think it was SUSE. They had a bunch of them there, and I couldn't decide which one I wanted, so I didn't buy it. But what I did do was I went and got me a book. All right, this would have been around 2000. So the first book that I got about Linux was Sam's Teach Yourself Linux in 10 Minutes. And this book was written by a fellow named John Ray. John Ray. And they don't talk anything about installing Linux. It's basically running Linux on like a mini computer or a mainframe in this book. And a lot of the stuff that's in this book today doesn't apply, but a ton of it does. So I had this book, and I kept reading it. I would pick it up and read a little bit about it. I didn't actually have a Linux computer, but I started reading about it. So a few years go by, and then, like I said, in 2007, late 2007, I lost that gig, and I had some downtime. And before I started the insurance agency, I started playing around with this thing that was new at the time called Ubuntu, which was Linux, and it had the GNOME 2 desktop on it. And I installed it 2 or 3 times. I screwed up 3 or 4 computers with it. I really wasn't very good at it. I got frustrated with it. it was kind of a weird thing. I would play around with it for a while, and then I'd get all mad, and then I wouldn't use it for a while. I'd go back to using Windows XP, or I didn't. I think Windows XP at that time. So I'd go back to XP, and then a couple months later, I'd hear, well, they have a new version out. We got to check this out. So I would do that. I posted a few YouTube videos about that at the time, but nothing very serious about it. Little bits and pieces. And so I just kept poking at this thing and playing with it in the background. And then 2010, I had a friend of mine who was working for VMware. And at VMware, at that time, he got me a license for the workstation software. So he hooked me up with that. And so I had a Windows 7 machine by that time, and I was running VMware on it. And then I figured out that I can try every Linux distro on the planet now and not have to worry about installing it or setting up a dual boot or any hardware incompatibilities, because I can run them in VMware. And at that point, I was off and running. I started playing with it in VMware, and then 2012 came along, and that was the first time that I took a computer and said, okay, you're going to be my Linux computer. And it was Ubuntu 12.04. Like 2 days after it came out, I downloaded it, installed it on this machine. It had all the drivers, everything worked. And from that point forward, I have been running Linux on hardware continuously somewhere. But I didn't make a big deal about it on YouTube, because at that time the YouTube videos were focused on audio. And I was talking about records and cassette decks because that was the thing that I was really into. Well, I used Linux for a long time, and then Ubuntu 14.04 came along, and it just blew me away because it worked. Everything worked out of the box. And that's when I realized, okay, it is time to dump Windows and go for Linux. So when I did that, before I actually said, okay, I'm going to run everything in my house on Linux, I took a class. And it was through the Linux Foundation, and it is called Introduction to Linux. It is the first class that you take if you want to get a Linux Foundation certification. And I took the whole class, and I took it through edX, and I got a 97 when I got done with it. The only thing that I did not do well on was the bash scripting, but the rest of it I kind of aced, mainly because I'd already been playing with Linux for a long time, and also just by that time I had read so much and picked up so much from the community that I knew a lot of it, but there were still a lot of new things. And at that point in time, what I wanted to do was to get my Linux sysadmin certificate. Well, I never did that. I haven't gotten that far yet. It's something that I would like to do somewhere down the road, because I think at this point, between having taken that class and the other tutorials and things that I have gone through, that I could probably take the exam from the Linux Foundation and actually get it. But what I decided to do somewhere along the way is that I really didn't want to work with Linux on servers. Servers are cool to me to a certain extent. I know some people get really nerded out by them and what they can do. But for me, they've always been a means to an end. I mean, you have to have a server, so you set up a server to get your files over to a workstation where the real work happens, that sort of thing. So what I decided to do was, first of all, when I switched over to Ubuntu Linux full-time, I started posting videos on YouTube. And I had been doing the audio videos for a long time, but I used to make enough money on the videos about audio to be able to do be able to buy something to talk about once a month and come up with an interesting video about it. And then YouTube, Google kind of jacked around with how they did the revenue sharing. And a lot of folks who were posting on YouTube, and this is a couple 3 years ago now, they basically cut the money in half. And so I went from making enough money off of the ads on YouTube to be able to buy stuff to do audio videos about, or videos about audio. and I couldn't do it anymore. So I started posting videos about Linux because I was really getting into it. I was doing this switch and I was taking these classes and things like that. And that's where the YouTube videos you see on this channel started. When I started doing the Linux thing, some of the old audio videos are back there, gang. You can see me talking about cassette decks and turntables and things like that if you want to. But the real focus here is Linux, and it has been amazing since I started doing this. This channel has taken off. I cannot believe that there are over 15,000 subscribers. The numbers of views that I get on this, it's just amazing. A lot of people out there are very interested in Linux. They're very fed up with the Mac and Windows world. They're looking for an alternative, just as I was. Now you got to remember, I worked with Windows software from, well, Lord, Microsoft, from DOS 3 all the way to Windows 7. I have never run a machine with Windows 8 on it. I knew the minute that I saw Windows 8, I said, I'm not going to use this anymore. I'm done with it. It was just a mess, and it hasn't gotten any better. And so I'm very happy to be completely out of that world. But what I realized is I didn't want to do the servers. What I really wanted to do was figure out some way to, first of all, give back to the Linux community. And second of all, I wanted to help people who were not computer geniuses get started on Linux, because I realized that the system had come to a place where you didn't have to be a computer expert to make it work. So that is where the idea for EzeeLinux came from, and here is the current EzeeLinux webpage. And you are more than welcome to come here and read about it. I've got a bunch of stuff up here. Now, this page is kind of static. It doesn't change a whole lot. I know I'm not really a web page oriented person, and I did finally get it updated here with the help from Jeremy O'Connell at Cyberweb Solutions. So this page is powered by Linux. The server that it runs on is Linux. It was written on Linux. It runs on Linux. This is a Linux page, and I want you to come check it out, because the idea here is just to take all of that experience that I had, especially the gateway experience working as the accelerated tech support person, and the communications experience from working in radio. In radio you talk to a lot of people, you have to do that. And then I have the engineering experience from radio, and also the experience of having to train all of those people how to use those automation systems that I was setting up and working with. So I'm taking all of that, and what I'm saying here is, if you are somebody who is curious about Linux but maybe timid about getting started, then I want to hold your hand. I want to help you get started with this, either through a YouTube video here on the channel. If you see a YouTube video, I have several videos where I go through the complete install process from beginning to end. And if you still want help, I offer one-on-one help too, for a fee. And you can find out about that here on the EzeeLinux page. So that's who I am and how I got here and where I came from. And like I said, what I wanted to do, instead of becoming a neck-bearded Linux nerd who worked in the back room with servers, because I'm just not good at that side of things anyway. I'm not good at scripting, and I'm never going to be a programmer, but I'm good at making desktops do what I want them to do, and I'm good at working with hardware and getting things to work. So that lends itself to helping new users. And unfortunately, in the Linux community, there isn't a great deal of effort going on to bring new people in to the community. And so that's what I'm focusing on. And so that's why a lot of people, I think, enjoy my videos, because I take time to talk. I do tend to elaborate points. I do that on purpose. I want to make it so that people understand what's going on with the computer and how this works. And I do repeat things 3 different ways a lot of the time, so that if you don't get it the first time, you get it the second time and the third time. And that just goes back to the days when I used to train people in radio how to do this, because I did that all along the way. Was you had to train, you have to talk to people in a way that they can understand what you're talking about, and it helps to personalize it. So that's why these videos run long. It's why I talk the way I do and how long they are. Most of the YouTube videos I see that are tutorial videos are not much help. on, when it comes to Linux, because the person doesn't take the time to explain what they're talking about. So that's what I'm trying to do. And so far, it's gotten a tremendously positive result, and I'm very thankful for that. So that is what we're doing here, gang. And I just thought that I would take the time to go through all this stuff with you. And if you're new to the channel, and if you haven't seen a whole bunch of my videos, I'm pretty sure I've covered all this stuff, but not in one place before. And that kind of tells you a little bit about who I am. And I don't work in radio anymore. I don't do freelance voiceover work. This is what I do. I do this and take care of the house. Kind of my role in life at this moment. So, you want to learn more, look at EzeeLinux. Also, check out EzeeLinux on Facebook. And if you would, give it a like. Okay, here's the Facebook page. It's actually featured here on the EzeeLinux page. As long as you don't have ad blocking software that blocks out Facebook, you should see this when you come to EzeeLinux. If not, you can always go to Facebook and just do a search for EzeeLinux and it will pop right up. Also, I contribute articles to freedompenguin.com, which is a website that was founded by Matt Hartley, who is a longtime Linux guru. And so you will occasionally see some articles from me there. I haven't written anything for that page in a long time. It's just haven't had much to actually write about, but hopefully I'll churn something out soon. And that is it. So thank you for watching this video. I do appreciate it, and I hope that you got something out of it. And if you stuck around this long, hey, thanks for being so cool and doing that. I know these videos are long, but they're also in a podcast format. And to tell you the truth, I have actually found, I have been doing YouTube videos since 2008, that people respond better to videos like this than they do the ones where you produce the hell out of them and have flying graphics and things like that. Just talk to them, and they dig that. So thank you for digging it, and thank you for sticking around for as long as you did. And we will talk again soon.